evening and welcome to Information Please, your Peoria Public Library on the air, and bring you information about your library and your community. This evening I'm honored to have an author with us. This is Courtney McKinney Whittaker, who wrote The Last Sister, a YA novel that I enjoyed very, very much. Hi, Courtney.
Hi.
Thanks for taking time out to come and talk. I know you've just been traveling back to your home in South Carolina.
Yes.
And came down there visiting and are back now, so we could corner you. I read your book, The Last Sister, which being at the library, and I'm just a readaholic. I read everything. But I do read YA novels occasionally. We have a book club called YA for Adults that meets, and they were reading it, and I immediately had to read it because it was a historic novel set in a time period I'm very fond of. And so I read it, and I was like, ooh, I want to talk to her. So that was why I invited you to come, and I'm sure that our audience will be interested in what you have to say, and they can buy your book, check your book out from the library, whatever, and enjoy it. And I think, I don't know, what would you say the youngest is that could read that?
Oh gosh, typically in reviews they go 15. I would say high school.
High school and
probably what I would
adult,
recommend it for. Yeah,
there's a lot of adults that like YA novels because they just don't want to deal with the language and the violence and everything. And so YA novels are every bit as good as an adult novel, but tell great stories, but maybe not so saturated with the language and violence. And there's plenty of violence in this book.
There is, yeah, which is why I wouldn't recommend it for much younger.
Yeah, there's plenty of violence in this book and excitement. But it's not the kind of thing that you might get in an adult thriller or whatever. So we have your picture, which I'm not really sure why we brought a picture when you were going to be here, but there we are. But there's your book, The Last Sister. Where did you come up with the title and the idea of The Last Sister? Because I had not heard. It's kind of The Last Sister is kind of a concept or a folktale, and I had never heard that before.
Oh, really? Well, it's a folktale that I was familiar with when I was, I guess probably middle school, high school. I was really into mythology. I thought that was really cool, the Greek gods and all that. That was before the days of Percy Jackson, of course, but I got really into it and was very interested. And so the story of the three fates is one that had always kind of fascinated me. But the way it ended up in this novel was very unintentional, actually. So I started out and I was writing this novel about the Anglo Cherokee War, 1759 to 1761. Not a war that many people are terribly familiar with at all.
It's one of those wars that happened that they, in history class, you just get it as part of a big...
Right.
At this time, there was these conflicts, and you don't really know the details about it.
Right. Part of the French and Indian War, sometimes called the 7 Years' War, but a separate conflict within the larger idea. But to get back to your question about The Last Sister, so Katie, the main character, is the daughter of a person who's essentially a missionary. And that was sort of my way of getting an educated middle-class woman into this world, because educated middle-class women didn't really live on the frontier. That was quite uncommon, but I made her the daughter of a Presbyterian minister who goes to the South Carolina backcountry as part of a movement at the time to establish schools and educate the settlers there in the backcountry. And so at the time, people who were in the clergy were also tended to be humanities scholars. And people who were humanities scholars at the time, or really educated in any real substantial way, were really into classical history, ancient Greece, ancient Rome.
Everybody studied that.
Right, yeah. And very much idealized this world, and that's where, you get the architecture of the time and the idea of Latin as, the ultimate perfect language, where we get a lot of our silly rules for English that don't really make sense in English came about at that time. Like you can't end a sentence with a preposition because you can't do it in Latin, so you shouldn't do it in English. So The Last Sister, just as I was writing, and as Katie was narrating and thinking about her life and trying to make sense of it, that was a story that she knew, that I figured that she would have known.
She would have known, so you were able to read that through.
So just to briefly speak to it for those who haven't heard the story of the Fates is basically that there are 3 sisters, and there are various versions of this story. But basically there are 3 sisters. The first sister spins the thread of life when a baby's born, and the second sister measures the thread to see how long the life will be, and the third sister, the last sister, cuts the thread. So they have really long, complicated Greek names that I don't know and can't pronounce. Yeah,
so, good enough to call them
that's where it came
oldest
from.
And
I do have to give credit to my husband for the title, as we were driving up to his family's camp in upstate New York several years ago. And I was thinking, like, what am I going to title this book? I have no idea. And, he said, what about The Last Sister? And I was like, well, really? That's not really such a big part of the book. But then he was like, well, I think it really is. Like if you look at it closer, because it was in drafting phases at the time. And as I titled it The Last Sister, and I went back and drafted, I saw all the places where that theme really fit, more. So I brought that out to match the title.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, my thing was, when I looked at this book and saw it, my thought was she was a survivor, which is true.
Yeah.
But when I saw The Last Sister, I thought, oh, she's the last sister left. Everybody else was killed in the war or something, Whereas she actually doesn't have any sisters.
Right, yeah. Or she previously had sisters, but they had died as children, as often happened.
Yeah, well, back then it was...
Yeah.
And I know this from our work we've done at the library in genealogy, but 50% of children died before age 1, and another 50% died before age 5.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, I can't even, I have an 8-month-old, as we've talked about. I can't even comprehend it.
It's awful to think about. Yeah. And you do that, and you find whole families of children wiped out in one day. So it is. So, yeah. But at this point, do you want to give us a little more of a synopsis about, without doing too many spoilers?
Okay, so synopsis without spoilers. So basically what happens is that, as I mentioned before, Katie and her family are sort of an anomaly on the frontier. And at the time, that was very, very dangerous. I think that's always very dangerous on any frontier, not to be part of a community. This is an area where your community is your life. Yeah. It's literally life or death to be part of that community. And so what's happening during this time in the Anglo Cherokee War is that settlers and the Cherokee are on the frontier. They're in contact, a whole lot of reasons. But anyway, it's interesting to me because the British government can't afford a war at the time.
Right.
The Cherokee government can't afford a war. Both governments are working really, really hard to prevent this. And the people on the frontier are like, too bad. We're going to have a war anyway.
We're going to light that match.
Right, yeah. And they, they literally do. I mean, it's I think, really hard for us to comprehend the level of violence that was happening at this time. I mean, I almost stopped writing a few times just because
the violence is so horrific.
Well, not for that reason, but just because I was like, this is unbelievable. Nobody would have survived. But some people did, you know. As with any time in history, times you think no one would have survived, some people did. But back to your original question, what's the synopsis of the novel? So basically, Katie's father and mother have offended the people in the community. You know, they're
just by being different.
Just by being different, yeah. Just
they haven't done anything.
They haven't really done anything. They're just different. In their minds, they're probably superior to these frontier families who are living in abject poverty and
some of them may have been indentured servants,
right? Lacking much education at all. It's a class issue, really. I think, and it's an issue of we don't need you here. We don't want you here. Why are you here? Yeah. So what happens is that a group of their fellow settlers murders Katie's family and tries to make it look like a Cherokee raid. So she has nowhere to go. She can't go to her neighbors as she might have had it truly been a Cherokee raid.
Yeah.
She can't go to the Cherokee. They're at war with the Cherokee. Everybody's shooting first and asking questions later. So it's not like she would have much chance with any group. So her only hope really is to get to a British garrison. And so she heads over the mountains to the British garrison at Fort Loudon, which is today
and she's in South
Tennessee.
Carolina. Yeah, so we're dealing with South Carolina terrain.
Yes, far western South Carolina, which I think most people everybody always asks me if I'm from Charleston.
Yeah.
And I'm not.
No.
Yeah.
From the other part.
Right,
of
from
South
the other end, right. So we're dealing with mountainous terrain. The mountains do come down and hit South Carolina very near to where Katie lives.
Yeah.
So she goes up through North Carolina into Fort Loudon, and along the way she is injured and ends up meeting a young man from a Scottish Highland regiment, which is one of the interesting things I wanted to pull into the book was the presence of the Highland regiments and how they affected what was going on and their particular very interesting relationships with Native peoples in North America.
Yeah, and if people here want to see an authentic Scottish Highland Regiment reenacted, one of the places the 42nd Highlanders go to Fort Deschartres, which it's a long day trip, but you can do it in a day, usually in June sometime, and again later I think they come because they were actually stationed at Fort Deschartres, which is down just south of St. Louis.
Right.
And so it's very fun to see them, but they're out of Indiana, so you can see them at other places in Indiana if you want to drive over there. But people who are interested in that, what they really look like, I mean, they do the whole drill with the band, and they've got the people that do the dances, and they do the military drills, and they're really, really fun to watch. So I, having seen that, was pretty entranced with those scenes in the book as well. So that was fun. But yeah, she does meet an interesting cast of characters on her journey, and so I don't think we gave too many spoilers. You've got the landscape and the environment of South Carolina in the mountains, as well as the assorted characters that live there that all give this book a lot of its depth and interest. But of course, I always like things to be authentic, so I was really pleased to find that so correct in all the history and everything, which I think is great for high school readers to actually read something that is correct about history, because so often the things they read are fantasy, or they don't really have much to do with life as we know it, or life as it really happened. So that's fun. So how did you get the idea for this whole book in the first place, and why YA instead of adult? That's two questions.
Yeah,
sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so how did I get the idea for the book, and why did I take it YA? Well, I think, first of all, let's see if I can answer those sort of together. I had initially written a book for NaNoWriMo in, I think it was 2010.
Ah, okay.
And so that was actually a dystopian novel, because basically all I wanted to do was figure out if I could actually maintain an entire novel. So I'd been reading a lot of dystopian novel. I think that was when The Hunger Games came out, and and so I was like, well, I think I can probably do that, So, which sounds really arrogant to me saying it, but so I decided to sort of try my hand at it, and when I finished it and had it all polished up, I got feedback that it was a good novel. I was a good writer. Dystopian would not sell anymore, and
that wave has passed.
That wave has passed. Yeah. So the agent I was talking with about it, said, I really like this. Do you have anything else? And I was like, no. And so I, over the weekend, I was like, well, I want to tell her something, So, and then it occurred to me, I was like, why am I writing? Why did I go with this dystopian thing? I should write historical fiction. I have an undergraduate degree in history. I'd done historical work before. I knew how to do the research. I knew who to call if I got stuck. If I couldn't get past a certain point. So I was like, I should write historical fiction. It was just this big epiphany, because it was something that had never really occurred to me. So again, I sat down with my husband and talked about it and talked about like, well, I think this is a good story. I think it could go somewhere else. I'm not sure the setting is that important. So another thing I thought was, okay, all this dystopian stuff, it's all these awful societies that, are terrible to live in, and, there's so much oppression and everybody dies, and, and I was like, well, I've seen that before. So,
I know when that happened before.
So like all the time, so I thought, hey, if people want awful, we got some awful, right here. So we kind of over the weekend looked together and brainstormed, and my husband's my brainstorming partner. I know a lot of writers don't like to talk to their families at all, but he's really good for that initial part, because he gets really excited about working out a story and working out a plot. He would never be
He'd
fine
never
with
sit down
sitting
and
down and writing it, but
he
likes to think through the plot, and he's good at it. So I use that as a resource. So ended up with the Anglo Cherokee War, because basically I was thinking, okay, how can I have a young woman who's driven from her home, and she meets this guy in the wilderness, and she's going somewhere, but then she comes back, and why do all these things happen?
Yeah.
And I think that was really cool, because it went ahead and gave another layer to the plot, whereas I think if I'd started out and said, I'm going to write a book about the Anglo Cherokee War.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would have been so boring.
Yeah. Probably.
But because I already had this plot and I already had these characters who I thought could work and could work somewhere else, I was able to start with the plot and character rather than starting with the setting, and I think that really livened up the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
And as to why I went with YA, historical fiction, is the hard sell in YA, of course. But I did my Master's of Library Science in Youth Services. I'm a former Youth Services librarian. I don't think that ever leaves you. I maintain my memberships in ALA and YALSA and ALSC. And so I knew those books. I knew that was the area that I know. I also have an MA in English from Illinois State, and I focused on children's and young adult literature there. So it's an area I know, and I know who I'm writing to and who I'm writing for. I think it very much ends up being a YA adult crossover novel from what I've heard from a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
That it works for people of any age, really. So it's not just
it's not just a teen girl in love kind of novel.
Yeah, which I always said as I was writing it, I was like, I'm writing this for smart girls. I'm writing this for the girl I was. I would have loved this book. Yeah. As a teenager, and I grew up reading Anne Rinaldi. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She wrote tons and tons of American history YA novels. I grew up on American Girl, all that, back when it was history.
Back when it was new.
Yeah. My favorite story, though, I think about someone far outside my envisioned audience, is a lady I knew from home, from South Carolina, had given the book to her 99-year-old father, who is in an assisted living facility. He has Alzheimer's, and she said that he just loved it and really enjoyed it. And I was like, well, that's definitely not the audience I was envisioning when I wrote this, but I'm really glad, and it's really gratifying, to think that people from those different walks of life would enjoy it.
And I hope people other than young girls discover it and read it, because I do think they will enjoy it.
I hope so too.
And it has won an award. And so what is this award?
It's called an IPPY, so it's an Independent Publisher Book Awards. Basically, so these awards are for all the books that are published by anyone outside of the big five.
The big publishers.
Sometimes we call them the big five, sometimes they're the big three. I'm never sure, but it's just because they merge and they, you know, so anything outside of that, so anything published by a small or mid-size or university press, not the big New York giants. So any books outside of that, it won the silver medal for historical fiction.
Okay, all right. When was that awarded? Like,
that was just recently. Yeah, I found out, I think, May 1st.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
okay.
So my marketing director just emailed me yesterday and said, I have your medal, I'm sending it to you. So
how fun. Yeah.
I haven't even seen it
Get
yet.
a shadow box for that.
Yeah.
And that is your draft.
Yes. Well, multiple drafts.
Multiple drafts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long did it take you to write it?
It takes me about a year to do a full novel. So I think I started in February of 2012. Yeah. And I finished in February of 2013 and that was when I started submitting it. So.
Okay. How long did it take to get it published?
Not terribly long.
Oh,
actually.
That's encouraging for
yes, well,
for aspiring writers.
Right. Well, and one thing I would say is I did not end up going with a big New York press for a variety of reasons. I'd gotten some feedback that it might be too regional to sell to a national market, and that's something I think is can be valid, but I always question a little bit why anything set outside New England is regional. And I've had groups of students ask me about that.
Yeah.
And I think, it's something that they notice and they wonder why the experiences of their particular part of the country
are not valid.
Are not,
or why it's not valid for other people to learn about
about it, right, exactly. So, what were we talking about? My publishing process.
Yeah, how long it took.
So I had gotten that feedback, and so I said, well, it might not sell in a national market, but I think it could sell to a regional press. I think it could sell in a regional market. It's not a bad book. I was pretty confident that the book itself was good, and that was the feedback that I'd gotten as well.
Yeah.
That maybe just the subject matter was not going to sell nationally.
Right.
So I had published a book in 2006 with the University of South Carolina Press, which is where I went to school. And so I contacted my editor there, who I'd worked with, and my whole intention was just to ask him about regional presses and just to ask if he could recommend any that he thought would be good to work with.
Yeah.
And because, university presses don't publish children's and YA fiction. And so he said, well, actually, we're starting a new imprint called Young Palmetto Books for children's and YA. Can we look at it?
Oh,
and so I was like, sure. So I ended up sending it and going through the process with them. And I think it was February of 2013, February, March, that I talked to him. And he wasn't the editor I ended up working with, but he put me in touch with the right people. And we ended up getting final approval at the end of July in 2013, and then it was slated for October 2014 publication.
All right, that's not long at all.
So no, it's nowhere near as long as you would go with maybe a much larger press, where it usually takes a lot longer.
And we've got this book.
Yeah, that's the one I was just talking about, the earlier work I had done.
Different name.
Yes. So I don't know. We had touched on that a little bit before. So this was my honors thesis for the South Carolina Honors College as an undergraduate.
All right.
So basically, the guy on the front, William James Rivers, was a professor at what was then the South Carolina College before it changed its name sometime in the late 19th century, I believe.
Oh, okay.
So he was a professor during the Civil War, before the Civil War, and before and during, I should say. And he wrote this novel about the burning of Columbia. Columbia was burned by Sherman's troops in February of 1865. And so this novel that he had written was in manuscript form. When I say manuscript, I mean handwritten, you know. And my professor, who was trying to work with me to figure out a project, was like, well, I think there's this manuscript that I've heard about in the South Caroliniana, which is where the archives are, and maybe you should take a look at it. It might be worth looking into. So we looked into it, and my project ended up being taking the manuscript and preparing it for publication.
Okay.
And then writing the introduction
and the whole
thing. So I typed it by hand. Well, of course, by hand.
You had to transcribe it.
I transcribed it, yeah, and
edited it.
And edited it into Eunice, A Tale of Reconstruction Times in South Carolina. So it opens on the night of February 17th, as Sherman's troops come into the city.
Okay.
And so.
But this was published also.
Yes, that was published in 2006 by the University of South Carolina Press.
All right. So you've got 2 books out there. Are you working on something new?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm working on. I have one novel finished that's totally different from anything I've done before, and then I've returned to the 18th century for my work in progress. So okay. I'm just sort of getting started and figuring out all of that. But it's set in the 18th century, and right now things change, as you go along.
Yeah.
But right now it's about 2 young women, and I think it's going to be a dual narration, who are both pursuing Lord Cornwallis for their own reasons. They have different reasons why, but one of the reasons I decided I wanted to do that was because, as I'm sure happens to you a lot with your reenacting, you encounter these people from history, and the person you encounter is not the person you see portrayed. Mm-hmm. And initially, I was going to do a companion to The Last Sister, and I started doing my research, and then it was like and I may still do that, but I found another story that I felt like wanted to be told. And so that's what I'm working on right now.
Well, we're going to look forward to your next one, and I highly recommend that everybody who hasn't read The Last Sister get a copy. It was a great time to read. You can read The Last Sister for summer reading. We want to thank Courtney so much for being with us today, and you can find it at the library or buy your own copy. We'll see you next week on Information Please.